Prime Minister, Presidents, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be in Montenegro, especially in such a beautiful place as Budva. And it's a particular honor to be here this year, as Montenegro marks a decade since regaining its independence, and as it moves to strengthen that independence by taking the final steps towards NATO membership. Membership of NATO is a privilege. It's also a responsibility to the billion people who live within the 28 nations of the alliance, to protect them from harm and to defend them from whatever threats that they or that we face. This has been the rationale of the NATO alliance since its inception almost 7 decades ago, and it remains so as we face the most challenging security environment we have seen for a very long time. Today, the alliance does not face just one major challenge, as we did during the Cold War, but two. To our south, we see violent extremism, weak and failing states, which have caused instability and chaos across the Middle East and North Africa, and produced mass migration and acts of terrorism. And to our east, an increasingly aggressive Russia seeks to dominate other nations and recreate a divided Europe based on spheres of influence. I want to speak about both of these challenges and how NATO is responding before I say a few words about Montenegro itself. Now, first, looking south. Defying the hopes of the Arab Spring 5 years ago, President Assad declared war on his own people, and the world watched as Syria began its long descent into civil war. The war created a vacuum in which the so-called Islamic State, or ISIL or Daesh, has flourished. It's led to the death of hundreds of thousands of people and caused millions to flee their shattered homes and the brutality of ISIL. While most remain in the countries surrounding Syria, many have sought shelter on European shores, prompting the greatest refugee and migration crisis on this continent since the Second World War. The extreme violence that has become the hallmark of ISIL has horrified the world, but it has inspired a few misguided individuals to commit horrific acts of terrorism, whether in Paris, Ankara, Brussels, or San Bernardino, California. The international community has risen to the challenge. Every NATO ally is taking part in the US-led coalition to counter and destroy ISIL. And even though NATO is not in command, the ability of NATO allies and partners from Europe and the Middle East to operate together in the coalition is thanks to years of joint operations in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Now, when it comes to the refugee crisis, national governments and the European Union are in the lead, but NATO is assisting. Ships from NATO's Standing Maritime Group are in the Aegean Sea, helping the EU's Frontex and the Greek and Turkish coast guards to stop illegal trafficking and to save lives. NATO's most significant role in the South, however, is in helping to tackle the root causes of instability in the region. NATO is working with our partners from Jordan and Iraq to Morocco and Tunisia, helping them to strengthen their own security, to better deter and defend against attack, and to become more resilient to internal disruption. We're building the capacity of Jordan and training Iraqi officers. We'll soon begin advising Tunisia on counterterrorism and building the capacity of its special forces. And we stand ready to help Libya build its security institutions if requested by the new government of national accord. And I hope that at the upcoming NATO summit in Warsaw, the alliance will commit to an even more ambitious defense capacity building program for our southern neighborhood. By projecting stability in this way, we can prevent conflict and avoid the need to deploy military forces. Now, while the world is watching Syria and the crises to our south, we must continue to address the serious challenge posed by an aggressive and revanchist Russia. Since the founding of NATO in 1949, the extraordinary success of the Euro-Atlantic area in terms of both safeguarding freedom and democracy and spreading prosperity has been based on respect for international law and for the principles laid down in the Helsinki Final Act: sovereignty, territorial integrity, sanctity of borders, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Russia undermined these fundamental principles the moment its troops took Crimea by force. With the illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea and the subsequent violent destabilization of eastern Ukraine, Russia effectively tore up the international rule book. And we've known for some time that for the Kremlin, sovereignty is only for the strong, and definitely not for Russia's former Soviet neighbors. As we heard at last year's UN General Assembly, Yalta, not Helsinki, is now seen as the model for European security. And that can never be our vision. Russia's actions in Ukraine are part of a pattern of disturbing behavior. Russia has massively increased its defense spending, expanding and modernizing its armed forces. It holds vast, no-notice snap exercises, such as the one that it used as a cover for the taking of Crimea. It uses rhetoric and propaganda, and it funds right-wing fringe parties in an attempt to destabilize its neighbors and undermine the solidarity of the alliance. And it tries to pressure other nations, whether NATO allies or neutral countries, approaching and sometimes crossing our borders with its ships and its planes. The response of the international community here, too, has been firm. The European Union and the United States have led the way in imposing sanctions and travel bans and in excluding Russia from the G8. NATO has also responded. Allies will never recognize the Russian annexation of Crimea, and we continue to call on all parties, including Russia, to fully comply with the Minsk agreements and end the Russian-backed insurgency in eastern Ukraine. Until then, we've suspended all practical cooperation between NATO and Russia, even as we keep channels for political dialogue open. Now, NATO has also responded by implementing the largest increase in our collective defense since the Cold War. The Readiness Action Plan, agreed at our summit in Wales in 2014, increased the size of the NATO response force to more than 40,000 troops, with a spearhead force that can be ready to deploy within 48 hours. We opened a series of headquarters across the east of our alliance to coordinate training, exercises, and, if necessary, reinforcements. But we now need to go further. Whether it's little green men or conventional forces, we need to be able to deter any Russian incursion into the eastern countries of our alliance. That is why NATO defense ministers agreed in principle earlier this year to enhance our forward presence in the east on a multinational and rotational basis. Now, in a welcome move, the United States has announced that it intends to quadruple its commitment to European security next year under the European Reassurance Initiative, with more troops on continuous rotation in Europe, more training and exercises, and more pre-positioned equipment on European soil. This will represent a huge contribution to NATO's enhanced forward presence, and I hope it will encourage the European allies to do their part in bolstering our deterrent posture by the time of the Warsaw Summit. So Russia should know that if it tries to attack a NATO ally, whether its methods are ambiguous or direct, it will meet a swift response from allies from across Europe and North America, and that it would soon regret such action. Now, let me emphasize that everything that NATO and the NATO allies are doing in response to Russia's aggression is defensive, proportionate, and in line with our international commitments, including the NATO-Russia Founding Act. We do not want a new Cold War. We want Russia to return to compliance with international law and respect the sovereignty of its neighbors. But until it does, there can be no return to business as usual. Now, as we increase our strength and bolster our deterrence, we do remain open for dialogue with Russia. Dialogue is essential if we're to manage a difficult relationship. And I believe we can have an effective dialogue with Russia in an atmosphere of mutual respect. We disagree on many things, but that's all the more reason for us to communicate clearly and openly and often. Dialogue is also important to convey our resolve and to press Russia to conduct its military activities in a more transparent and less provocative manner. So we will maintain our dialogue, but we will not compromise our principles. That was the message we conveyed at the NATO-Russia Council meeting last month. Now, over the last quarter of a century, membership of NATO has grown substantially as more and more countries have sought to join our alliance. NATO enlargement has done for Europe's East what NATO did almost 70 years ago for Europe's West. NATO's formation in 1949 created the strong foundation for security, democracy, and economic prosperity in Western Europe, keeping the peace during the Cold War and creating the conditions for European integration. NATO's multinational approach to security has enabled countries to overcome historic rivalries and to work together to reach common goals. Membership in NATO has enabled countries to pool their resources to greatly enhance the defense bang that they get for their taxpayers' buck. It allows members to join up their forces, intelligence, and expertise, making everyone safer. And on top of that, membership gives every member an equal voice and an equal say in the decisions taken by the alliance, as every decision is taken on the basis of consensus. In short, NATO can be called a sovereignty multiplier, making countries stronger and more secure. So I agree with the Prime Minister that Euro-Atlantic integration is the key to stability here in the Balkans. But when I say that, I don't mean that it's necessary for every country to seek membership in NATO. We respect the views of Serbia and of other countries in Europe that have chosen not to pursue membership, countries such as Austria, Sweden, and Finland. Nonetheless, we have robust partnerships with all of these countries, including a robust partnership action plan with Serbia signed last year. Neutral countries like Serbia now play an important role in international peacekeeping operations, and we appreciate Serbia's contribution to the UN missions in Cyprus and Lebanon and to the European Union missions in Africa. 10 years ago, Montenegro finally regained its independence. This country knows just how vulnerable that independence can be. NATO membership will underpin that independence and enhance it. Becoming the 29th member of NATO will ensure Montenegro's long-term stability, sovereignty, and security. It gives Montenegro a seat at the table and the ability to shape NATO policy. And in that atmosphere of security, Montenegro will be able to more effectively press ahead with its domestic reforms, including the fight against corruption and organized crime, and to strengthen the rule of law and freedom of the press. We at NATO will continue to help our friends in Montenegro explain what we are, what we do, and what membership will mean for the Montenegrin people. Here in Montenegro, we talk with people from across the political spectrum, including with opponents of NATO membership, in the spirit of openness and transparency, and we're happy to continue that conversation. Now, as you've heard, later this month, NATO foreign ministers are due to sign Montenegro's accession protocol with the Prime Minister. Montenegro will then become an invitee and will be able to attend almost all NATO meetings, including the Warsaw Summit, as an observer. Every NATO ally must then ratify the protocol in their national parliament in order for it to become a full member. Now, that will not be the end of Montenegro's journey, but the beginning of a new, secure European chapter in its long and noble history. As others have already said today, we face many challenges from many different places. If we stand alone and isolated, the forces of oppression and chaos could destroy us. But if we stand together through NATO, united in our values and in our determination to protect them, then we can weather any storm. Today as 28 allies, but very soon as 29. Thank you very much. I look forward to answering your questions.
As a moderator, I'll take the opportunity to ask the first question. Well, actually, I have two short questions. The first one is, Ambassador, as we were talking yesterday, you mentioned something very interesting. So your first visit in Montenegro was when you were only 17 years old. So what were your impressions about Montenegro then, and what are your impressions now?
Okay. Will this pick me up without leaning over? Okay. No, it was an unusual opportunity as a young student to spend a whole month in the former Yugoslavia when I was just graduated from high school. And then, of course, I was already a student of Russia, and for me, what was interesting was to see that there was a more human version of the rival socioeconomic system that we were pitted against during the Cold War, and that there was an alternative path. And I think it was perhaps the experience in those days that may have influenced the changes that took place across Central Europe and the Soviet Union. But of course, in those days, I never would have imagined that NATO would be admitting members from either the former Yugoslavia or from the former Warsaw Pact. So, but it was a bit of an eye-opening experience, and I've maintained a strong interest, as you can see, in this part of the world.
And I think everybody should be happy that you are back in such an important date, also a year for Montenegro. And the question I'd like to begin about the topic in hand today. And it's simple. If you were king for a day, what will be the 3 top things you will do to make NATO stronger?
If I were
a king for a day?
King for a day. Well, I think the most important thing we need to do right now is, as I stressed in my remarks, to strengthen our deterrence against an increasingly aggressive and unpredictable Russia. But of course, deterrence isn't just about Russia. Deterrence is about dealing with all potential threats, and we need to deal with the potential threats from the south, which primarily come in the form of non-state actors, which can't be necessarily deterred in the same rational way as a state adversary. But of course, we have aggressive regimes, including in Syria, which could encroach upon the security of our key ally, Turkey. So deterrence has to be 360 degrees. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be to underpin not just deterrence, but everything that NATO needs to do. I'd like to see a dramatic increase in defense capabilities. If I could wave my magic wand, every ally would be spending 2% today and not tomorrow on defense, 2% of GDP. And NATO would then have a far greater range of capabilities on which to build a stronger deterrent, and also to be able to project power to intervene in crises if we have to do that again. We have to continue that. And my third wish would be to see the process of Euro-Atlantic integration reach its logical conclusion, including seeing the threshold crossed by the 2 other aspirants from the Western Balkans, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And over time to see any other country that seeks to join NATO and can meet our standards and contribute to our collective security be entitled to join as well, because as was said by our host at the beginning, no third party should have a veto over the process of NATO enlargement. But that, of course, includes coming to a better and more stable relationship with Russia at the same time. So if I had 4 wishes, I would see our current increasingly hostile relationship with Russia turn back towards the kind of partnership that we were building in the 90s and even in the early days of President Putin.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. We'll start with the question. Please introduce yourself, and I will suggest to keep the questions short so we have more time for discussion. We'll start here, please. Okay, you already have the microphone, Professor French? Okay, so you can start.
Good morning, thank you. Julian Lindley French, indeed, I've stolen the microphone, so I have the floor. Sandy, thank you for your statement. There's a lot of assumptions about the coming presidential election in the US, and irrespective of whether we'll have a President Trump or a President Clinton, it strikes me that the pressures on the United States mean that America's world role is changing, and by definition that means fundamental changes in the relationship to which you refer. What will be the impact of the pressures on the United States, its global role, on the alliance? And what's your vision for the alliance in 5, 10 years' time as we adapt to the consequences of those changes and we make a 360-degree adaptation a reality and not just rhetoric?
Well, clearly the complexity of the international environment facing the United States as well as NATO, in my view, makes it even more important to strengthen international collaboration in dealing with those threats. The United States needs strong allies more than ever. It needs allies in terms of its partners in NATO, allies in other parts of the world, Japan, Korea, Australia. It also needs strong institutions with which it can work, such as a strong European Union, an effective United Nations. So I think in a challenging environment, it will put more pressure on the other members of the NATO alliance to live up to their commitments at the Wales Summit on increasing defense spending and spending their money on the important capabilities identified by NATO as contributing most to our ability to deter aggression and manage crises in the future. It requires the readiness of allies to share the burdens when it comes to extending our partnerships and our efforts to project stability by sending their trainers and advisors to help countries like Jordan or Morocco or Tunisia to build the resilience that can protect them against the spread of ISIL and instability more generally. My vision for the alliance in 5 years' time was one where the burdens are shared more equally, where this imbalance in defense spending between the United States and the rest of the alliance has at least been alleviated. I won't have unrealistic hopes, but I would like to see Europe step up, and that means countries big and small, because every nation, even small future allies like Montenegro or small countries like the Baltic states, can contribute in key capability areas, but also add their political voice and weight to the kinds of tough decisions that we will have to take in order to manage an increasingly unstable international system.
Thank you. We'll take the other question here.
Thank you very much. My name is Dejan Miletić. I'm coming from Belgrade. I'm university professor as well leader of the Center for Globalization Studies. Thank Ms. Valbona for giving me a word, as well as our friend Julian, who is give to you a question regarding the general aspect of NATO. I'm going to refer to the particular aspects. First of all, I passed through the agenda. I haven't found any Serbian representative, but actually we had elections a few days ago, and that's the reason why nobody is here regarding the political aspects. But on the other hand, we have a group of highest officials from security and intelligence here, and as well as academic community, which is present in tackling the problem of Euro-Atlantic integrations. And I think that is by itself some kind of message how Serbia is looking regarding the NATO and Euro-Atlantic integrations. I think that lots of things has been done in the previous years, especially because General Secretary was in Serbia and some agreements were signed, very, very useful. What is my main question? What can be done to change public opinion? How much we are working together on changing public opinion, which is very low.
In Serbia, you mean the public opinion in Serbia?
That's one thing. Maybe to have larger cooperation in military industry. Maybe to do something which is going to show the message to the public that there are lots of possibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would like to correct you. We have representatives also from the Serbian government, some friends also.
I haven't seen
Well, we certainly are keen to engage with Serbians across the political spectrum, whether they're for a closer relationship with NATO or against. We recognize the sensitivities of NATO. It's only 16 years since the crisis in Kosovo and the NATO air campaign. But I think it's important for everyone in Serbia to have an objective understanding of what NATO is today, and also why NATO felt it had no alternative but to act 16 years ago. We need to talk it out on the past in order to be able to have a positive relationship going forward. But I think, as I said in my remarks, there's already a lot going on in the relationship between NATO and Serbia. It's a very ambitious partnership action plan that was signed last year by Foreign Minister Dacic, and we're now implementing that. And it doesn't oblige Serbia to do anything it doesn't want to do. It's strictly based on the needs and the wishes of the partner and what NATO has on its menu to offer. But I think it can help promote collaboration among our armed forces, interoperability that will help Serbia be a better contributor to UN peacekeeping operations or EU missions, and perhaps the increased interaction will overcome some of the bitterness and resentment which still persists with regard to issues of the past. So we don't have an unlimited budget to send people all the time, but we are very open to engaging with, especially with
I'm optimistic regarding the
Are you optimistic regarding Serbia in this
Well,
path?
I'm very optimistic about Serbia because, as I see it, the voters have again reaffirmed their support for European integration and EU membership, which brings Serbia into the same community of values. 22 members of NATO are members of the EU, so and the institutions are becoming closer and closer as we try to deal with these complex challenges, which don't always lend themselves to a purely military response, but require the blending of the toolkits of NATO and the EU. So Serbia's partnership with NATO, its eventual integration in the EU, will bring us closer together, whether or not opinions change on the membership issue.
For the sake of time, we'll take the last question, Mr. Lammert.
Excellency, first of all, thank you very much for your clear message. I think it's great that NATO is on a good way to create spearhead forces with the opportunity to deploy troops in the framework of 48 hours to each territory of NATO. But we all know that Russia is on a good way to create a new capacity, anti-access area denial capacity, which Russia tries to prevent NATO to deploy troops in maybe the Baltic states. I just come from there, and they
I can hear you, but
Yes.
the interpreters can't. Here comes another mic to your left.
I think Russia is on the way to create an anti-access area denial capacity. They want to prevent NATO to reach maybe the Baltic states before crisis exists. What are we doing to prevent this? I think to be present there is more necessary than ever before, and therefore I very fully agree that we will send maybe a brigade or 4 battalions to the Baltic states and Poland, and that the United States have announced this. But what do you see? What can we do to prevent Russia to build up such a capacity?
Well, this is a very serious issue, and Russia is already building it up and has a substantial capability in these bastions in several parts of Europe, Kaliningrad Oblast, in the Kola Peninsula, in Murmansk, in that area, and now with their illegal occupation of Crimea, which is still Ukrainian territory legally, but it's becoming de facto a huge Russian military base with air, land, and maritime capabilities, and at least some hints that they might even introduce nuclear weapons into Crimea. And now with the buildup in Syria, they have an increasing capability in the Eastern Mediterranean. So this already presents a complicating factor for NATO planners. It could indeed at least impede our ability to bring in reinforcements rapidly to the extent that they were to commit what would be a very aggressive act, which would be to actively try to block air and naval movements by NATO forces. So we do have to consider this as part of our strategy, and as you said, one of the factors why we're enhancing the forward presence of forces and not relying 100% on reinforcements is this anti-access area denial capability. But it also reflects the geographic realities that countries like the Baltic states and Poland are right on the Russian border, and Russia has shown in its recent exercises that it can mobilize very sizable conventional forces with little or no warning time. So that's another reason to have at least some combat-capable multinational forces there all the time, so that the Russians know that even if it was a little green men scenario, they would run into allies from North America and Europe, as well as the local forces. So we haven't yet decided on the exact size of this forward presence. Indeed, our planners have put on the table options involving rotating 4 battalion-sized battle groups through the Baltic states and Poland. Final decisions will be taken at the summit, and we have a key milestone before that, our defense ministers meeting in the middle of June. But I think we're on track to deal with the immediate situation, but over time we may need additional capabilities to counter this A2AD, including more sophisticated air defenses of our own, electronic warfare, suppression of enemy air defense, more robust maritime capabilities, in order to ensure that freedom of movement for NATO is assured. So thank you for bringing up what's a very important issue.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your time and for your important messages, and we're grateful you are with us today. Thank you so much.